Well, good afternoon, friends on LinkedIn and YouTube. We're so glad you're joining us once again today on the Self-Employed Life Show. I have a fantastic guest with me today who's going to talk about management skills. And part of it is, why are so many employees leaving their jobs? Very often it's because of a poor relationship with their manager. But here's what's really important to me that I want you to walk away with, and that is when you become a business owner, guess what? You're now a people manager. And if you're anything like me, I was not prepared for that skill and find it incredibly difficult. So Dr. Jack Wiley is here to help us out with that. And I am going to welcome Dr. Jack in. Hello, dear Jack. How are you?
I'm well, Jeffrey. Thanks for inviting me to join you today.
Excellent. Well, as I said, this is an important conversation because what concerns me is on one hand, if you're leaving a corporate job and you've had if you haven't had a good model of a manager, you're likely to carry that same poor skill set into being a manager, being a people manager and a business owner. But on the other hand, many of us, even if you've been an employee for decades, when you become a business owner, it is a different skill set of people management. And like I said, one I was not prepared for. I was so young when I went into business at 20 years old. I was also far younger than the people I was trying to manage. I find it difficult and just realized I'm not a natural people manager. So I'm so glad we're going to have this conversation today. So let's start off with what is going on in the world. And by the way, let me mention that if you are joining us live and you have some questions for myself or Jack, please go ahead and ask your question. You can even just let us know where you are in the world. If you're watching this on replay, again, just ask your question in the thread and we will be sure to get your questions answered. But let's talk about what's going on. We've got the Great Resignation, the Big Quit, so many different names, but undoubtedly there are a lot of people. In fact, there's a statistic that your team has sent to me that said that 1 out of 4 workers plan on looking for a new job post-pandemic. 1 out of 4. So certainly a part of this is bad relationship with managers, but there's got to be I've been looking at it up to this point as a lifestyle choice. So what do you think is really going on with this high level of people leaving their jobs?
Right. No, that's a very important observation. And in fact, even since that statistic was shared with you, it's now bumped up. The more recent statistics show that 65% of workers today are considering leaving their current job. We had 4.4 million leave the workforce in August. And another factor that plays in here is the number of people who are considering leaving their current organization as a result of vaccine mandates and a refusal to participate with that mandate in a cooperative sense, so to speak. So all of these factors are part of the context and part of the background. I think what's happened is that the pandemic and the consequences of the pandemic have really had an impact on employees. We could say that in some respects that workplace dynamic has changed and most likely changed forever. What happens under circumstances like what we've been through over the last 18 months is that people are being asked to do more with less resources. In some cases, they have less control and autonomy over the accomplishment of their work. When they're working remotely, we see organizations putting in monitoring systems to check in on employees and how they're performing and exactly the times under which they accomplish their work. And of course, they also have to have concern about the resources that have been provided for them in getting their job done and the goods and the services out the door, so to speak. So all of these factors, especially with the pandemic and the remote work locations piling on top of childcare, schooling of children, this creates stress. I mean, stress is a very simple concept in some respects. It's simply the experience that people have when the demands outstrip the resources. And a lot of people are stressed to the point of feeling that burnout. All of these things contribute to a thought process. Maybe this isn't the right course of action for me. Maybe I'm not on the right pathway. Maybe there's another avenue of employment or fulfilling my career interests outside of the corporate environment I'm involved in right now.
Yeah. It's interesting. I hear you explain that. It reminded me of a conversation I had with somebody. Now, I do like to mention that I'm a rare individual, I suppose, in that I've actually never had a traditional job. I've never been employed by anybody else. I've been self-employed since really 14, and then more legitimately by the time I was 20. But I've never received a paycheck from anybody other than myself, and I've never had a traditional job. So, there's a lot I don't know about the experience of being on the receiving end of having a manager. But somebody said to me as a result of the pandemic that employees saw who their managers really were, values, how they were able to handle the stress of the situation. So that had to play a big part of in such a crisis. We kind of had a chance to see people for who they are, and maybe we didn't like necessarily who we were working for, either the manager or even the values of the company.
Right. And I think that's exactly right. Under those heightened conditions and sometimes the tense situations that develop, we see the true colors come through. I was in contact with employees all throughout the pandemic, being connected with people and asking them questions about how things were going. And what they told me was that there were three things that they really wanted a lot more of from their manager during the pandemic. One was workload support. Again, this gets back to working under different conditions, perhaps with fewer coworkers to get the job done, increased demands being placed. They wanted more support from their manager. Secondly, if they were working in an office environment or they were essential workers, they certainly wanted to work with managers who were enforcing safety protocols to keep them safe and secure. Essential workers were really on the line during the height of the contagion. And the third thing they wanted was more autonomy. They wanted more flexibility. Look, they're basically saying, I'm working under more stressful conditions. This is a period of higher duress, if you will. And what I want is a little bit more flexibility. I don't want to feel guilty if I have to take time off or if I change my work schedule. Work with me and be flexible in relation to how we approach these things so that we can all be successful at the end of the day.
Yeah. So as I said in the beginning, let's now let's talk about how we can be better managers. Again, I would imagine part of the challenge here is modeling. If one of the challenges of becoming self-employed, owning your own business, and ultimately perhaps hiring people, managing people, one of the problems is modeling. If you've only seen a certain style of management, you're likely to follow through on that. So let's see if we can break the trend and do it better. And I know this is your sweet spot. This is what you're particularly good at. And so tell us a little bit, I know you offer 8 keys to people management, 5 key behaviors. Let's talk about those behaviors, because I'm kind of curious about that myself, because I've not had the employee experience. What are the 5 key behaviors that employees most want to see? And I think this is an important place to start, so that we as employers can have the empathy and understanding of what behaviors do they most value from us, so that we can show up in a way that suits them.
Right. That's sort of a fundamental question. Well, let me first of all, before I get to the 5 key behaviors, just say that I derive these key behaviors based on what employees told me. And so my survey was of a representative worldwide workforce, employees from 27 countries around the world. Those economies represent about 85% of the gross domestic product. We made sure that we had stratified samples representing the entirety of the workforce. These are the 5 behaviors that employees told me they most want from their immediate boss. Number 1 was to be supportive and understanding. So in other words, be accessible, be considerate, listen to me, seek out my opinions, help me accomplish what I need to do in order to get the job done. That's number 1, to show support and understanding. Number 2 was to provide recognition. Appreciate me, show recognition, give me credit when credit is due. Don't take credit for my ideas when you put them on display up the chain of command. Number 3, and this is interesting because this particular behavior isn't typically highlighted in leadership theories, but I want to be treated with dignity and respect. basically employees are saying, treat me the same way that you would wish to be treated. Value my opinions, value my experience, reach out and see what I have to say about how we might solve this problem. Don't treat me as simply a cog in the wheel. Number 4, and this is pretty straightforward, but communicate clear performance expectations. In other words, define success for me. What is it that represents a good output, a good product, a good service, so that I know clearly what it is I'm shooting at in terms of that target. And then number 5, reward my performance contributions. I mean, this is the quid pro quo. I bring my skills, abilities, knowledges to the workplace. I expect to be compensated in return, but compensation shows up in 2 ways. One is in the paycheck, but number 2, it's in opportunities for increased skill development, training programs, and some guidance with regard to my future career. So reward for performance, fair compensation, if you will, takes those 2 forms, but those are the 5 key behaviors.
Awesome. Brilliant. So I speak a fair amount, which I always find really ironic, but I speak a fair amount in the HR industry. And obviously I find it ironic because I've never dealt with HR as an employee. So I find it interesting. But the reason I'm often brought in to speak at HR events is because of my work as a brand message consultant. And while I was out there speaking on the topic of brand messaging to attract ideal customers, people in the audience started coming up to me saying, the very same thing you're teaching would help us recruit better employees. So can you come into our company? Can you come to our event and teach us how to recruit better employees? So in order to pull together the keynotes that I speak on, I did a fair amount of research on the mindsets of today's employees in the same way that's how I approach attracting ideal customers. And, what I found is that, first of all, today's workforce is so often misunderstood. And I've got 3 kids in their 20s, and I could see how they have been misjudged. So I guess my question to you is, how much have you seen, society has changed? For example, today, the younger workforce today, how they measure success, how they want to work. Not only do they want to work remotely, but they also want more autonomy. My understanding is they want to understand more, like, what's the goal, what needs to be done, but less about being told when they have to do it. So what has just the change of the workforce? In what ways has the change of the workforce shifted attitudes, et cetera, in ways that management hasn't caught up to? And that's part of the problem.
Right. So, yeah, the younger workforce certainly represents a challenge, but I think it represents a challenge for almost every generation as we cycle through this. But certainly younger workers tend to be a bit more mission oriented. So they want to be able to identify with the vision, the mission of the organization. That's very critical to them. And plus, if they're well trained and they're competent people, they have options for where they can go to line up with the mission and vision that suits them. But interestingly enough, we've done a lot of testing, particularly in the United States, to look at what the differences are by age groups and generational groups. And interestingly enough, they tend to be fewer rather than greater in terms of those differences. So when it comes to what I want from my immediate boss, the differences really aren't that great. The older generation may be a little more insistent on fair pay as they get ready for retirement. The younger generation a little more insistent on growth and development opportunities because that's the future for them. But in many respects, they're looking for exactly the same thing in an immediate boss. And we understand that really leadership is a reciprocal process. We focus on the leader, but the leader is viewed in the context of how they interact with employees. In many respects, how employees view their leaders is actually a more important concept than the skills and abilities that the leaders have, because employees are reacting to how the leader shows up. One other thing that we found in terms of what employees most want is they want to work for a leader who's good at problem solving and decision making, not someone who simply does that, but someone who does it well. And that's why it's called a skill, the skill of decision making, the skill of problem solving, knocking down the barriers, not dithering to get a decision made, holding up employees in terms of progress because the decision wasn't made and not learning from your mistakes. These are things that leaders have to avoid, and it affects all generational groups. So we want to work for someone who's competent.
So once again, we actually have more alike than we are different, and so that's just always an important life lesson to learn. I'll post here something I think has been helpful. Well, I know it's been helpful because I've gotten great feedback on it from many people. So I'm offering this. You can, it's at the selfemployedready.com. This is a 12-month month-by-month timeline of things that you want to do before you leave your corporate job. After years of coaching people in that transitional experience, I then also interviewed a fair number of people to get their tips from the inside of the corporate world. What are some of the things they wish they thought about before they made the transition? So I laid out a 12-month plan so that you can do it in a logical, what I refer to as kind of a safe leap. So you can plan ahead for your transition from your corporate life to the self-employed life. And by all means, if you're not planning so far ahead that you have 12 months, then if you have 6 months, you just do some things a little faster. But go ahead and grab that at selfemployedready.com. I think you'll find that to be helpful. Jack, what I've said many times and I've been in business long enough to have gone through a few crises in business. Often a crisis just speeds up what was coming anyway. With what we're seeing now, between the great resignation, even supply chain, a lot of people are saying the supply chain issues that we're dealing with, these were all coming anyway. So do you think that this shift in the workforce and managers, the increased need for better management skills, and in fact, now that you've written a book about this, like your book seems incredibly timely. Do you think this was a topic of conversation that was a long time coming?
I do in many respects. And one of the differences in our leadership theories, they're not based on what employees identify as the most important attributes of their immediate boss. There's someone's idea about how things should be, or it's the following of someone who was a particularly good leader and trying to mimic what they've done. But in this book, what I've done is to go out to the employee voice, if you will. So the book is really designed on what employees have to say. We, again, understand that leadership is a reciprocal process. We need to understand what employees consider to be effective. And if you stop to think about managerial success, at the end of the day, it's typically determined by how someone rates your performance. But there are a lot of things that go into managerial success, and that's that determination. Do I have an engaged workforce? Do employees get along well together? Are we performing well as a team? What I found is that the manager who displays the attributes of the employee-centric manager is scoring at the top of the chart on all of those dimensions, including the overall performance. So in science, we try to look at what the end game is. What are we trying to understand at the end of the day? What we're trying to understand is what constitutes successful performance and what is the pathway to get there. One of the things you mentioned early on has to do with preparation. First of all, we have 24 million people managers in the United States today. Secondly, in a survey I did into the run-up of the writing of the book, I found that 72% of those occupying people management roles today have either had no people management training or it's been capped at just 4 hours. So part of this gap we have between how employees want their managers to show up and how they do show up has to do with lack of preparation and lack of development. Another problem that exists is that managers tend to inflate their own ratings. So when we see how managers rate themselves compared to how employees rate them, there's a pretty significant difference. Managers on average rate themselves as about 20% more effective than do their employees.
That's interesting.
Is how their employees see them, not how they see themselves. So all of these things are contributors, I think, to what you're talking about, a gap, sort of a lack of awareness of what's happening among managers today. They're not informed about what employees want. They haven't been trained. And in the meantime, they're operating with a little bit of an inflated view of how well they're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the, it drives a lot of my work to support self-employed business owners is that and really the impetus behind writing my book, The Self-Employed Life, was becoming aware that 13 years of coaching business owners, and I've realized every single person I've ever worked with is really good at what they do, but they're in an industry that had no business training. I'm trained as a photographer and a podcaster and a speaker and a coach, and I've gone to got these certifications all over the place, but not one educational institution taught me how to make money at that skill set, which quite honestly was the big motivator behind the Self-Employed Business Institute over my head, which we launched in September, because this is my life goal, to solve that problem. Like, if nobody's going to teach self-employed people how to be in business, I was complaining to a friend of mine, and she said to me, "Well, why not you?" I'm like, all right, I'll do it then. But that's, to that point, it's similarly, and we don't currently include this skill set in the Self-Employed Business Institute, but you're inspiring me, Jack, that we're not trained to be people managers. Yeah. And that may be something we need to add to our curriculum, because while I'm solving marketing problems and systems problems and self-development problems in the Business Institute, we're not addressing, likely because it didn't occur to me either, how much we are lacking in the skills of managing people. So really important work. Let's talk then about what you offer as the 8 keys to people management. Obviously, we want people to buy your book. Go ahead and, by the way, mention your book and how they can get it. And then just give us an overview of those 8 keys to people management.
Right. So certainly the book can be obtained at www.employeecentricity.com, which is my website. I'm also affiliated with Engage to Excel, so you can go to the engagetoexcel.com website, find a way to buy the book, and in the not too distant future, you'll be able to acquire that on Amazon as well. So the 8 behaviors, we've talked about the 5 or the 8 key attributes. We've talked about the 5 behaviors, and again, that's support and understanding, recognition, dignity and respect, communicating clear performance expectations, and rewarding performance contributions. Those are the behaviors. Those are the things that we do or respond to our employees. We influence them through those behaviors, or we respond to employees through those behaviors. The one skill I brought up, and that's decision-making and problem solving. We want to work for someone who's smart and knocks down obstacles to the achievement of the work. The final 2 of the 8 attributes are really personal standards of conduct. Again, this isn't often reflected in leadership theories, but it's very important to employees. In fact, 1 out of every 5 employees around the world identified one of these 2 attributes as what was most important to them. The first is to be fair and just. And we've heard a lot about justice, about social justice, about equitable treatment. This has always been important to employees, to be treated equitably, fairly, consistently, objectively. The second piece, though, is to be, employees want from their boss, is that they want them to be honest and trustworthy. This is the old walk the talk concept: integrity, ethics, communicating with transparency. Employees can see through people who are trying to spin what's going on. They don't like that. They want to work for someone who's fair and someone who's honest. Fundamental issues in our social relationships.
Yeah, brilliant. I just want to add that, as a podcast host, I read, generally speaking, 2 business books a week so that I can prepare for interviews. And it always strikes me, and as an author myself, how often books come along exactly when the world needs it. And I just think this is one of those conversations. I wonder if I'm sure you probably did some due diligence. Perhaps you checked out how many books were out there about management. But the point is, we need a modern day book about management, because it has shifted. Not only has it been shifting in how employees want to be treated to some degree generationally, but the pandemic itself dramatically changed. It brought to light a lot of these issues. So, like I said, I think you've written a book that people really need to see and read at this time. And I'll add to that, in support of self-employed business owners. improving your people management skills is essential. If you've been in your corporate role all along, just don't assume that you have any people management skills. If you've been an employee up to this point, you may have in your own mind decided what you liked or didn't like about your current manager or previous managers, and you think you're going to use that to become a people manager yourself. I will tell you, I think in the course of starting your own business and all that you're going through and all that you're going to focus on in marketing and making money, it is so easy to overlook the people management skills and add to that, let's say, a fair amount of stress that comes along with starting your own business, that may not make you the easiest person to be with under those stress. Like I said, like during the pandemic, your true colors are going to show up. So I think it's just a really important step. I said, I'm as I listen to you, Jack, I'm aware that this is not currently part of the curriculum of the Self-Employed Business Institute, but we may just really reconsider that. The curriculum itself over the 5 months of the Business Institute is so jam-packed, but we are bringing in guest speakers once a month during the 5-month program, and you've inspired me. So maybe we'll have another conversation. Maybe I'll need to have you come in and to speak to our Business Institute students about people management skills, because it is sorely lacking. I'm always hesitant to put somebody in this very challenging position, but I feel like you'll handle it. Any predictions for the future? Like with this is all so crazy right now with the volume of people that are leaving their jobs, and clearly your desire to create change and improve management skills is evident. Where do you think this is all going? Any prediction for the future?
Right, Jeffrey. So you've acknowledged time and again, we're in a war for talent. Organizations aren't going to be successful without talented employees. Full stop. That's the reality. So how do we attract employees? And once they're on board, how do we keep them there? If we're in a war for talent, we've got to pay attention to the employee voice. This is really the era of the employee. And so we have to be plugged in to their experience and what they're looking for in the overall relationship with the employer, but what they're looking for, as you've pointed out, in that relationship with the immediate boss. And so those organizations who are good at that, and there are some who are, but the organizations are trying to get off the ground. If they can establish this kind of framework from the very get-go, and that becomes the culture of the organization, they're going to have much greater opportunity and possibilities for success in the long term.
Yeah, it's you're speaking to the same power shift that we as business owners have come to know, that truly the power is in the hand of customers today. In fact, there was a Forrester research study that I leverage all the time, and I think it's so brilliant that the Forrester research piece showed that people make a 70% decision to reach out to a business before they even reach out, right? So that's where the power lies. The power lies in the consumer, and the other power shift that's taken place is power now lies in the hands of employees because they have choice. Exactly. And if businesses want to move forward, it is a war on talent. And I'm the eternal optimist. I believe this will shake down in a really good way, because sometimes I wonder who I really work for. Businesses hire me, but I feel so often I'm really an advocate for the customer experience, because on a day-to-day life that you and I and everyone watching is experiencing, we could be having a great day and have a bad encounter with a business or a representative of that business, and it can ruin our day. Absolutely. So I think that's where being in business becomes a life-changing goal, a world-changing goal, because if we as in businesses need to get better talent representing our businesses, hope remains that people will have better experiences with those that they do business with.
Exactly. And if you stop to think about it, the employee experience is simply a riff on customer experience. We 100%. Want to define it from the eyes of the employees. That's what's really important at the end of the day. That's what keeps people's heads in the game, and that's what keeps them committed to the organization. So essential. And if we were good at doing this, just think how we would raise sort of the overall average. It would lift the performance of the entire system.
Yeah, it's funny. I just did a podcast. I broadcast 2 podcasts a week. Wednesday episodes are interviews, and Monday episodes are just me going on about whatever I care to, because it's my show. And I recently did a show just on that. Like, we have an opportunity to raise the bar here. Let's like grab it, because the bar and a lot of things, I said, then the show is like, know, like, and trust. Like, know, like, and trust has been the buzzword in business for so long. Like, you just need to get your customers to know, like, and trust you. I'm like, really? Is that it? Like, that's a pretty low bar. Like, let's raise the bar a little bit. And I think I know for sure the same can be held for raising the bar on how managers treat their employees, which will therefore raise the bar of the experience that customers experience on a daily basis. So, Jack, thank you so much for being here and writing your book. One more time, tell us again real quick where we can grab the book.
Right. www.employeecentricity.com or www.engage2excel, and soon on Amazon.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you very much for being here and shedding light on this a very important conversation.
Thanks for the interest. Loved it.
Thank you. There you go. I hope you'll join us again. We're here almost every Tuesday. Yes, the schedule interrupts every now and then, but I do my best to continue to bring you great content to help you make the transition to your self-employed life. I hope to see you back here again real soon.